It's strange how often people search for change in the outside world, while the real source of transformation sits quietly within them, unnoticed and underused. Most of what shapes your life doesn't come from sudden luck or external events, but from patterns buried deep in your own mind, patterns you didn't consciously choose, yet follow every day. If you look closely, you'll notice that your reactions, habits, fears, and even your expectations seem to run on autopilot. That hidden system is what many call the subconscious mind, and understanding it can quietly shift the direction of your entire life. Think of your mind as having two layers. The conscious part is the one you're aware of right now, the part that thinks, analyzes, questions, and decides. It's logical and active, but also limited. Then there's the subconscious, which operates beneath awareness. It doesn't argue or judge. It simply accepts what it's given and turns those inputs into reality over time. It's always working, even when you're asleep, quietly influencing your behavior, your emotions, and the outcomes you experience. The fascinating part is this: your subconscious doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's repeatedly imagined. If you continuously think about fear, failure, or limitation, your subconscious absorbs those thoughts as instructions. In the same way, if you consistently hold thoughts of confidence, success, and possibility, it begins to align your actions and perceptions accordingly. It's less like a thinker and more like a builder, faithfully constructing your life based on the blueprint you provide. This explains why two people with similar abilities can end up in completely different places. One might carry a deep belief that opportunities are scarce, that success is reserved for others, or that failure is inevitable. Without realizing it, they act in ways that confirm those beliefs. The other person, even without extraordinary talent, may hold a quiet conviction that things will work out, that effort leads somewhere, and that challenges are temporary. Over time, that internal belief shapes very different results. What's important to understand is that your subconscious is not trying to sabotage you. It's simply loyal. It follows whatever patterns have been impressed upon it, often since childhood. If you grew up hearing doubt, criticism, or fear, those messages may have settled deep within you. They can replay in subtle ways: hesitation before taking action, self-doubt in moments of opportunity, or a tendency to expect the worst even when there's no clear reason. But here's where things begin to shift. The subconscious, while powerful, is also impressionable. It responds to repetition, emotion, and belief. When you consciously choose new thoughts and reinforce them consistently, you begin to rewrite those deeper patterns. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't require force. It requires persistence and clarity. One of the simplest ways to understand this process is through the idea of suggestion. Every thought you repeat is a suggestion planted into your subconscious. If those suggestions are weak or inconsistent, they fade. But if they are clear, emotionally charged, and repeated over time, they begin to take root. Eventually, they influence how you feel, how you act, and what you notice in the world around you. This is why the state of your mind before sleep is often emphasized. In that quiet moment, when the conscious mind begins to relax, the subconscious becomes more receptive. The thoughts you carry into that state tend to sink deeper. If you fall asleep worrying, replaying problems, or imagining negative outcomes, those impressions can strengthen overnight. On the other hand, if you gently guide your thoughts toward calm, confidence, or a desired outcome, you create a different kind of internal momentum. It's not about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. It's about choosing which mental patterns you reinforce. The subconscious responds not to what you wish occasionally, but to what you believe repeatedly. And belief, in this sense, is not forced optimism, it's a quiet acceptance that something is possible. Over time, this inner shift begins to reflect outward. You may find yourself reacting differently in situations that once triggered fear or doubt. Opportunities that once felt invisible may start to appear. Even your relationships can change, not because others have transformed, but because your perception and behavior have. There's also an important connection between the subconscious and the body. Your thoughts don't just stay in your head, they influence your physical state. Stress, anxiety, and prolonged negative thinking can manifest physically, while calm, positive mental patterns can support reacting rather than observing. They accept their thoughts as truth without questioning where those thoughts came from. But once you begin to notice your inner dialogue, the quiet sentences you repeat to yourself, you gain a kind of control that wasn't available before. And that's where a deeper realization begins to unfold. If your current patterns were learned, they can also be unlearned. If your subconscious has been shaped by past experiences, it can also be reshaped by present intention. This doesn't mean you can instantly become anything you want, but it does mean you're not as fixed as you might believe. As you start to work with your subconscious rather than against it, you begin to see how subtle changes in thought can lead to meaningful changes in life. It's less about dramatic breakthroughs and more about quiet, consistent alignment. And yet, understanding this is only the beginning. Because knowing that your subconscious is powerful raises a more important question. How exactly do you communicate with it in a way that creates real, lasting change, instead of temporary motivation that fades away? That's where things start to get more practical, and a bit more surprising. When you look closer, you'll find that the methods are simpler than expected, but they require a level of patience and consistency that most people overlook. There's a quiet shift that happens when you stop trying to force change and instead learn how to influence it from beneath the surface. Most people approach personal growth with effort alone, pushing harder, trying to stay motivated, relying on willpower. But willpower is fragile. It fades with stress, distraction, and time. What truly creates lasting change is something much deeper, something that doesn't rely on constant effort. It comes from aligning your subconscious patterns with what you actually want. To do that, you first need to understand how the subconscious accepts new ideas. It doesn't respond well to pressure or struggle. In fact, the more you try to force a belief, the more resistance you create. Instead, it responds best to calm repetition, emotional clarity, and mental imagery. It learns the way a habit forms, gradually, naturally, and without tension. One of the most effective ways to begin this process is through simple, repeated statements that reflect the reality you want to create. Not exaggerated or unrealistic phrases, but clear, believable thoughts stated in the present tense. When these are repeated regularly, especially in a relaxed state, they begin to bypass the analytical resistance of the conscious mind and settle into the subconscious. But repetition alone is not enough. Emotion plays a critical role. A thought without feeling is weak. A thought with genuine emotion becomes a signal the subconscious takes seriously. This doesn't mean you need intense excitement or forced positivity. Even a quiet sense of certainty, a calm belief that something is possible, is enough to begin shifting internal patterns. Visualization works in a similar way. When you imagine a situation clearly, not just seeing it, but feeling it, your subconscious begins to treat it as a familiar experience. Over time, this familiarity reduces resistance and shapes your behavior in subtle ways. You start acting in alignment with that imagined reality, often without realizing it. This is why athletes mentally rehearse their performance, and why people who expect success often move through challenges differently than those who expect failure. The external action may look similar, but the internal foundation is completely different. There's also an important principle at play here. The subconscious mind moves toward what feels natural. If a goal feels distant or unrealistic, the subconscious resists it. But if you gradually introduce new ideas in a way that feels believable, it begins to accept them. This is why small, consistent mental shifts are often more effective than dramatic declarations. Another subtle but powerful method involves the use of mental imagery just before sleep. In that half-awake, half-asleep state, your mind becomes more receptive. If you gently focus on a desired outcome during this time, not with strain, but with ease, the impression tends to sink deeper. Over time, this creates a kind of inner expectation, which quietly influences your actions and decisions during the day. What's interesting is that this process doesn't require constant attention. Once a pattern is established in the subconscious, it begins to operate on its own. Just like a habit, it runs in the background, shaping your responses without needing conscious effort. This is where real change becomes sustainable, when it no longer feels like something you have to try to maintain. However, important element is forgiveness, not as a moral concept, but as a psychological release. Holding on to resentment, guilt, or anger keeps certain patterns active in the subconscious. These emotions act like anchors, tying you to past experiences and reinforcing the beliefs that came from them. When you gradually let go of these emotional attachments, you free up mental space for new patterns to form. This doesn't mean forgetting or denying what happened. It means choosing not to let those experiences define your present identity. It's a shift from carrying the past forward to allowing it to remain where it belongs. There's also a subtle but important distinction between awareness and identification. You can notice a negative thought without becoming it. You can observe a pattern without assuming it defines you. This separation creates a small but powerful gap, a space where change becomes possible. As this awareness grows, you begin to see that your thoughts are not fixed truths. They are patterns, and patterns can be reshaped. This realization alone can reduce the intensity of many limiting beliefs, making them easier to work with. At the same time, patience becomes essential. Deep patterns don't dissolve overnight. They soften gradually, often in ways that are not immediately obvious. You might notice small shifts in how you respond to situations, or moments where you act differently without consciously trying. These are signs that something deeper is changing. Interestingly, as your internal patterns begin to shift, your external environment often reflects those changes. You may find yourself drawn to different opportunities, different conversations, even different people. It's not that the world has suddenly changed, it's that your perception and behavior have, and that naturally alters your experience. There's also a growing sense of quiet confidence that develops, not from forcing belief, but from gradually experiencing a new way of thinking and being. This kind of confidence is stable because it's rooted in repeated internal alignment rather than temporary motivation. And yet, there's another layer to all of this that often goes unnoticed. Beyond beliefs, beyond habits, there is a deeper connection between the subconscious mind and the broader patterns of life itself. Some might describe it as intuition, others as a form of inner intelligence that goes beyond deliberate thought. When you begin to trust this deeper layer, decision-making becomes less about overthinking and more about clarity. You start to sense what feels right, not based on fear or impulse, but from a quieter, more grounded place. But this raises an intriguing question. If the subconscious mind can influence not only your internal state but also how you interact with the world, then how far does that influence actually go? Because at a certain point, it begins to feel like the line between inner change and outer reality is not as separate as it once seemed. At some point, the idea begins to settle in that your inner world is not just influencing your reactions, but quietly shaping the direction of your life in ways that are easy to overlook. What once seemed like coincidence or luck starts to feel a bit more connected, as if your expectations, assumptions, and mental patterns are constantly interacting with the situations around you. This doesn't mean that every event is under your control, or that life becomes predictable. Rather, it suggests that the way you perceive, interpret, and respond to events plays a much larger role than you might have realized. Two people can face the same situation and walk away with completely different outcomes, not because the situation itself changed, but because their internal lens shaped their experience. The subconscious mind acts as that lens. It filters reality, highlighting certain details while ignoring others. If you carry a belief that people are generally untrustworthy, you'll naturally notice behaviors that confirm that idea. If you hold a belief that opportunities are rare, you may overlook chances that don't match your expectations. Over time, this filtering effect reinforces your existing beliefs, creating a cycle that feels self-confirming. Breaking that cycle requires more than just new thoughts. It requires a shift in attention. What you consistently focus on becomes more visible in your life. This is not because the world suddenly changes, but because your awareness expands in certain directions. When you begin to expect solutions instead of problems, your mind starts to search for them. When you expect progress, even small improvements become noticeable. This shift in focus also affects how you handle uncertainty. Instead of seeing the unknown as something threatening, you begin to approach it toward actions that align with a quieter sense of confidence. There's also an interesting relationship between belief and action that becomes clearer over time. Many people think they need to take action first in order to build confidence. But in reality, even small internal shifts can make action feel more natural and less forced. When your subconscious begins to accept a new idea, your behavior starts to align with it without the same level of resistance. This is why some changes feel effortless while others feel like constant struggle. When your internal state and your external goals are aligned, movement becomes smoother. When they are in conflict, even simple steps can feel difficult. Understanding this can save you from unnecessary frustration, because it shows that the issue is not always a lack of discipline, but sometimes a lack of internal alignment. Another subtle aspect of the subconscious mind is how it responds to trust. When you constantly doubt, question, or second-guess yourself, you create a kind of internal tension. That tension can interfere with decision-making, making everything feel uncertain. But when you develop a sense of trust in your own thinking and intuition, your mind becomes calmer and more focused. This doesn't mean blind confidence or ignoring reality. It means reducing unnecessary mental conflict. When you make a decision, instead of replaying it over and over with doubt, you allow yourself to move forward with clarity. That clarity often leads to better outcomes, not because you are always right, but because you are fully engaged with your actions. There's also a connection between your subconscious and your relationships with others. The way you see yourself often shapes how you interact with people. If you carry a sense of insecurity, it may show up in subtle ways: hesitation, overthinking, or seeking validation. On the other hand, when you feel more grounded internally, your interactions become more natural and less strained. People tend to respond to that shift, even if they can't explain it. Conversations become easier, connections feel more genuine, and misunderstandings are less frequent. It's not about changing others, but about changing the energy you bring into interactions. Over time, these small internal adjustments begin to create a broader sense of stability. You are less reactive, less driven by fear, and more able to navigate challenges without losing your sense of direction. Life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes more manageable, more understandable, and perhaps most importantly, you begin to feel less like you are at the mercy of circumstances and more like an active participant in your own experience. But even with all of this, there is one area where the influence of the subconscious becomes especially noticeable, and often underestimated. It's the connection between your mental patterns and your physical well-being. Because the mind doesn't operate in isolation, it constantly communicates with the body, shaping not only how you think and feel, but also how you function on a physical level. And once you begin to understand that connection more clearly, it opens up an entirely different dimension of what it means to truly change your life from within. It becomes impossible to ignore, once you start paying attention, that your body is constantly responding to your thoughts in quiet, subtle ways. A single moment of worry can tighten your muscles. Ongoing stress can affect your sleep, your energy, even your ability to think clearly. On the other hand, a sense of calm or confidence can relax your entire system without any external change. This connection between mind and body is not dramatic or mysterious. It's happening all the time, whether you notice it or not. The subconscious mind plays a central role in this relationship. It regulates many of the body's automatic functions, your heartbeat, digestion, breathing patterns, and more. While you don't consciously control these processes, your mental and emotional states influence how smoothly they operate. When your mind is filled with tension, fear, or conflict, the body often reflects that state. Over time, this can lead to imbalance or discomfort. What's often overlooked is that the body doesn't respond only to external events, but also to internal interpretations. If you repeatedly imagine stressful outcomes, dwell on negative possibilities, or carry unresolved emotional tension, your body reacts as if those experiences are happening in real time. This keeps it in a prolonged state of alertness, which can gradually wear it down. On the other side, when your thoughts are more balanced, steady, and constructive, your body tends to move toward a state of ease. This doesn't mean you eliminate all stress. Connection is through intentional relaxation, not just physical rest, but mental release. When you allow your mind to slow down, even for short periods, you create conditions where the body can reset itself. This is why moments of quiet reflection, deep breathing, or simple stillness can have a noticeable impact on how you feel. There's also a deeper layer to this process. When you begin to introduce positive, calming, or healing-oriented thoughts into a relaxed state, those suggestions tend to reach the subconscious more effectively. The body, in turn, responds to these impressions. It's not about instant or miraculous change, but about creating an internal environment that supports balance rather than conflict. Interestingly, belief plays a significant role here as well. If you genuinely expect improvement, your body often responds differently than if you expect decline. This is not about ignoring medical reality or replacing professional care, but about recognizing that your mindset can either support or hinder your overall well-being. You can see this effect in everyday situations. Two people with similar conditions may experience them very differently, partly because of how they perceive and respond to what's happening. One may feel overwhelmed and helpless, which can intensify discomfort. The other may approach the situation with a sense of calm and possibility, which often leads to better coping and, in some cases, improved outcomes. There's also a strong connection between emotional patterns and physical states. Feelings like resentment, anger, or prolonged anxiety don't just stay in the mind. They tend to manifest in the body over time. This is why emotional release, whether through reflection, conversation, or simply allowing yourself to let go, can have a physical impact. Forgiveness, in this context, becomes less about others and more about your own well-being. Holding on to negative emotions keeps certain stress responses active within you. Letting go, even gradually, allows those responses to settle. It's not an instant shift, but it creates space for a different kind of internal experience. Another important aspect is the way you speak to yourself about your body and your health. Constantly reinforcing negative expectations, even casually, can influence how you feel over time. In contrast, developing a more supportive internal dialogue can help create a sense of cooperation between your mind and body. This doesn't require exaggerated positivity. It's more about reducing harsh, repetitive negativity and replacing it with something more balanced and constructive. Over time, this shift can change not only how you feel mentally, but also how your body responds. As you continue to work with these ideas, a pattern begins to emerge. The subconscious mind is not just influencing isolated areas of your life, it's involved in everything. Your habits, your decisions, your relationships, your physical state, all of it is connected through this deeper layer of thought and belief. And yet, the most powerful part of this realization is not just understanding the connection, but recognizing that you can participate in shaping it. You're not completely at the mercy of automatic patterns. With awareness and consistency, you can begin to guide them. This doesn't mean controlling every thought or striving for perfection. It means developing a quiet awareness of what you repeatedly reinforce within yourself, and gently adjusting it over time. As this awareness deepens, something else begins to take shape, a sense of responsibility, but not in a heavy or overwhelming way. More like a quiet understanding that your inner world matters, that it has real consequences, and that it's worth paying attention to. And from that understanding, a new question naturally arises. If your thoughts, beliefs, and emotional patterns are shaping so much of your experience, then how do you build a consistent daily approach that keeps your subconscious aligned with the kind of life you actually want to live? Because knowing these ideas is one thing. Living them, day after day, in a way that feels natural and sustainable, that's where the real transformation begins to take form. What usually makes the difference is not a single powerful realization, but what you return to every day without much noise or effort. Real change tends to come from what becomes familiar, not from what feels intense for a short time. The subconscious mind, in its quiet way, is always listening to what you repeat, what you expect, and what you emotionally accept as normal. So the question becomes less about doing something extraordinary, and more about shaping what feels ordinary to you. A consistent daily approach doesn't need to be complicated. In fact, the mind is just waking up, it hasn't fully engaged its usual patterns yet. This creates a small window where your thoughts can be guided more easily. If you begin your day by immediately engaging with stress, distractions, or negative input, you reinforce the same patterns you are trying to change. But if you take even a few quiet moments to set a tone, not with force, but with calm intention, you begin to shape how your mind will operate for the rest of the day. This could be as simple as bringing your attention to a few clear thoughts that reflect how you want to feel or act. Not rushed, not mechanical, but steady and present. Over time, this creates a baseline, a kind of internal reference point that your subconscious begins to recognize as normal. As the day unfolds, the goal is not to control every thought, but to stay gently aware of where your attention goes. You'll still encounter stress, distractions, and moments of doubt, that's unavoidable. But instead of getting pulled completely into those patterns, you begin to notice them earlier. That awareness gives you a choice, even if it's a small one, to redirect your focus. The way you handle these small moments matters more than occasional bursts of motivation. Each time you choose a more balanced or constructive thought, you slightly reinforce a new pattern. It may not feel significant in the moment, but over time, these small adjustments accumulate. There's also value in creating brief pauses throughout the day, not as an escape, but as a reset. Even a minute of stepping back, taking a breath, and returning to a calmer mental state can interrupt patterns that would otherwise continue unchecked. These pauses help prevent your mind from drifting too far into stress or negativity. As evening approaches, your mental state begins to shift again. Just like in the morning, this is another moment where your subconscious becomes more receptive. The way you reflect on your day, the thoughts you carry into rest, all of this influences the impressions that settle more deeply. If you end your day by replaying problems, focusing on what went wrong, or reinforcing frustration, those patterns tend to strengthen. But if you take a few moments to gently guide your thoughts, perhaps by acknowledging progress, however small, or imagining a better continuation, you create a different kind of imprint. This doesn't mean ignoring difficulties or pretending everything is perfect. It simply means choosing what you emphasize before your mind settles into rest. Another important element of consistency is patience. The subconscious mind does not respond instantly, and expecting immediate results often leads to frustration. But when you approach the process with a longer perspective, you begin to notice subtle changes that would otherwise go unnoticed. You may find that situations which once triggered strong reactions no longer affect you as deeply. You may notice that certain habits become easier to maintain, or that decisions feel clearer. These shifts are often gradual, but they are meaningful. It's also helpful to understand that setbacks are part of the process. There will be days when old patterns resurface more strongly. This doesn't erase progress. It simply reflects how deeply some patterns are rooted. What matters is how you respond when that happens. If you react with frustration or self-criticism, you reinforce the very patterns you are trying to change. But if you respond with awareness and a willingness to return to your practice, you continue moving forward. The consistency lies not in perfection, but in returning. Over time, this way of living begins to feel less like effort and more like a natural rhythm. You are no longer trying to change yourself constantly. Instead, you are maintaining an internal environment that supports the direction you've chosen. And within that environment, something interesting begins to happen. Your goals, your actions, and your internal beliefs start to align more closely. There's less conflict, less hesitation, and more clarity in how you move through life. You begin to trust your own thinking a little more. You rely less on external validation and more on your internal sense of direction. Decisions feel less like a struggle and more like a natural extension of how you see things. This is where the influence of the subconscious becomes most visible, not in dramatic transformations, but in the quiet consistency of your daily experience. And yet, even with all of this in place, there's one final layer that brings everything together. It's not just about techniques or routines, but about a deeper understanding of how belief, expectation, and inner acceptance ultimately shape the life you experience. Because at the core of it all, there is a and lasting way. At the center of everything you've been exploring, there is a principle so simple that it's easy to overlook, yet so influential that it quietly shapes nearly every aspect of your life. It is this: what you truly accept as real within yourself tends to express itself outwardly over time. Not what you casually wish for, not what you say once or twice, but what you consistently feel to be true beneath the surface. This inner acceptance is different from surface-level thinking. You can say the right words, repeat positive phrases, and still feel doubt underneath. And it's that deeper feeling, the one that doesn't need to be spoken, that the subconscious responds to most strongly. In many ways, your life begins to organize itself around these internal certainties. If you carry a quiet expectation that things won't work out, you may approach opportunities with hesitation, miss subtle chances, or withdraw too early. Not because you lack ability, but because your internal state is shaping your behavior in ways that align with that expectation. On the other hand, when you hold a grounded sense that progress is possible, you tend to stay engaged longer, notice more options, and recover more quickly from setbacks. What's important here is that this process is not forced. It doesn't come from trying to convince yourself aggressively. It develops from repetition, emotional reinforcement, and lived experience. Over time, certain ideas stop feeling like effort and start feeling like truth. And once something feels true, your subconscious begins to support it automatically. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single moment of strong belief does very little if it's followed by long periods of doubt. But a steady, repeated pattern of calm, constructive thinking gradually reshapes what feels normal to you. And what feels normal is what your subconscious uses as a reference point. There's also a strong connection between acceptance and resistance. The more you resist a thought or feeling, the more attention you give it. This doesn't mean you agree with negative patterns, but it does mean you stop fighting them in a way that keeps them active. Instead, you acknowledge them, allow them to pass, and return your focus to what you want to reinforce. This shift from resistance to redirection is subtle, but powerful. It reduces internal conflict and allows new patterns to take hold without constant friction. Over time, your mental environment becomes calmer, and that calmness makes it easier to maintain clarity. Another layer of this principle involves expectation. What you expect tends to influence what you notice, how you interpret events, and how you respond. If you expect difficulty, even neutral situations can feel challenging. If you expect solutions, your mind begins to search for them more actively. This doesn't mean ignoring reality or assuming everything will always go perfectly. It means choosing a general direction for your expectations, one that supports movement rather than limitation. Over time, this orientation changes how you experience even ordinary situations. There's also something worth understanding about timing. The results of internal change don't always appear immediately, and this can create doubt if you're not prepared for it. But much of what happens within the subconscious occurs below the level of immediate awareness. Patterns are shifting, even when there's no obvious external sign. If you continue reinforcing new ways of thinking without constantly checking for results, those patterns have space to stabilize. And when they do, the external changes often feel natural rather than sudden. It's less like something new has been added, and more like something has quietly aligned. Trust plays a role here as well. Not blind trust, but a steady willingness to continue the process without needing constant proof. This reduces the tendency to interrupt your own progress with doubt or impatience. As this understanding deepens, you begin to see that your role is not to control every outcome, but to shape the internal conditions from which those outcomes emerge. You focus less on forcing results and more on maintaining clarity, consistency, and alignment within yourself. And in doing so, you create a kind of stability that doesn't depend entirely on external circumstances. You're still influenced by the world around you, but not defined by it in the same way. There's a greater sense of direction, even when things are uncertain. Over time, this way of thinking becomes less of a practice and more of a natural state. You're no longer trying to apply techniques constantly. Instead, your thoughts, expectations, and responses begin to reflect a deeper level of understanding. You notice that you experience a sense of quiet confidence, not because everything is guaranteed, but because your internal foundation feels steady. When you reach this point, the idea of change itself starts to look different. It's no longer something distant or difficult. It becomes something ongoing, something that evolves naturally as you continue to shape your inner world. And in that realization, everything comes together. Not as a final answer, but as a way of living, one where your subconscious mind is no longer something that works against you, but something that quietly supports the direction you've chosen. There's a quiet kind of freedom that begins to emerge when you realize you're no longer constantly reacting to life, but instead responding from a place that feels steady and self-directed. It doesn't arrive suddenly, and it doesn't feel dramatic. In fact, it's so natural that you might miss it at first. But it shows up in small ways, in how you handle pressure, in how you speak to yourself, in how you move through uncertainty without immediately assuming the worst. This is where everything you've been exploring starts to settle into something practical and lived. The subconscious mind is no longer just an idea you're trying to understand. It becomes something you're actively working with, often without needing to think about it all the time. Your awareness has shaped it, and now it begins to support you more consistently. One of the most noticeable changes at this stage is how you relate to your own thoughts. Earlier, thoughts may have felt automatic and unquestionable, pulling you in different directions without much control. Now, there's a bit more space between you and those thoughts. You can notice them without immediately believing them. That space gives you a kind of quiet authority over your inner world. You may still experience doubt, fear, or frustration. Those don't disappear entirely. But they no longer define your direction. They become temporary states, not permanent truths. And because of that, they lose much of their power. There's also a shift in how you approach goals and outcomes. Instead of chasing results with urgency or pressure, you begin to focus more on alignment. You pay attention to whether your daily thoughts, actions, and expectations are moving in the same direction. When they are, progress feels more natural. When they aren't, you notice it sooner and adjust without harsh judgment. This approach reduces the emotional highs and lows that often come with striving for change. You're less dependent on immediate success to feel confident, and less discouraged by temporary setbacks. There's a steadiness that develops, a sense that you're on a path that doesn't need constant validation. Another important change happens in how you experience time. When you're caught in negative patterns, everything can feel urgent, as if something needs to be fixed immediately. But as your subconscious becomes more aligned, that urgency begins to fade. You start to trust that consistent effort, even in small amounts, is enough. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you more focused. You stop scattering your energy across too many conflicting thoughts and instead invest it in a clear, steady direction. And that focus often leads to better decisions, simply because your mind is less cluttered. Relationships, too, begin to reflect this internal shift. When you're no longer driven by constant self-doubt or the need for approval, your interactions become more genuine. You listen more clearly, respond more thoughtfully, and feel less pressure to prove something. This creates a different kind of connection, one that feels more balanced and less reactive. At the same time, you may find yourself naturally stepping away from environments or dynamics that reinforce old patterns, not out of rejection or judgment, but out of a growing sense of what supports your mental clarity and what disrupts it. This kind of awareness guides your choices without needing rigid rules. There's also a deeper sense of responsibility that develops, but it doesn't feel heavy. It feels clear. You understand that what you repeatedly think and feel matters, not in a dramatic or overwhelming way, but in a steady, cause and effect sense. This understanding encourages you to be more intentional, not because you have to, but because you've seen the results of doing so. And perhaps one of the most meaningful changes is how you begin to experience uncertainty. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid or fear, you start to see it as a natural part of life that doesn't need to disrupt your internal balance. You can move forward without having every answer, because your confidence is no longer tied only to outcomes, but to your ability to navigate whatever experience in a powerful way. Over time, all of this creates a life that feels less like something happening to you and more like something you're actively participating in. Not controlling every detail, but influencing the direction in a meaningful way. And as you continue living with this awareness, something becomes clear. The real value of understanding your subconscious mind is not just in achieving specific goals, but in changing the way you experience your entire life. It's in the quiet confidence, the steady clarity, and the sense that you are no longer disconnected from your own thinking. From here, the journey doesn't really end. It evolves. Because every new experience gives you another opportunity to observe, adjust, and deepen this understanding. And with each step, the connection between your inner world and your outer life becomes a little more clear, a little more intentional, and a little more aligned with who you are choosing to become. What becomes clear after all of this is that the real transformation was never about becoming someone completely different. It was about removing the noise, the old patterns, and the unnoticed assumptions that were quietly shaping your life without your awareness. Beneath all of that, there was always a more stable, capable version of you, one that didn't need to be forced into existence, only uncovered and supported. The subconscious mind, in many ways, is like fertile ground. It doesn't argue about what is planted in it. It simply grows whatever is consistently given attention, emotion, and repetition. For a long time, many of those seeds may have been planted unconsciously, through past experiences, external influences, or moments of fear and doubt. But once you become aware of this process, you begin to take a more active role in what you allow to grow. This is where a deeper sense of ownership develops. Not in a heavy or overwhelming way, but in a quiet understanding that your inner patterns are not fixed. They are shaped, maintained, and changed through what you repeatedly reinforce. And that means you always have some level of influence, no matter where you're starting from. There's also a growing appreciation for subtlety. Earlier, you might have looked for big, obvious changes as proof that something is working. But now, you begin to notice the smaller shifts, a calmer reaction where there used to be frustration, a clearer decision where there used to be confusion, a moment of confidence where there used to be hesitation. These moments may seem minor, but they are signs of something deeper adjusting. Over time, these small shifts begin to accumulate into something more substantial. Not because you forced them, but because you allowed them to develop consistently. This is how lasting change tends to happen, quietly, steadily, and often without immediate recognition. Another important realization is that your external results are often delayed reflections of your internal state. What you experience today may be influenced by patterns you've held for a long time. And what you begin to shift now may take time to fully express itself outwardly. Understanding this helps you remain patient, especially when progress doesn't appear immediately. It also changes how you interpret challenges. Instead of seeing them as signs that something is going wrong, you begin to see them as part of a larger process. Sometimes, old patterns surface more strongly just before they begin to lose their hold. Being able to recognize this prevents you from falling back into the same cycles. There's also a deeper sense of self-trust that develops. Not the kind that assumes you'll always make the perfect decision, but the kind that knows you can adjust, learn, and continue moving forward. This reduces the fear of making mistakes, because mistakes are no longer seen as final or defining. As this trust grows, your relationship with effort begins to change as well. You're no longer pushing yourself from a place of pressure or insecurity. Instead, your actions come from a clearer sense of direction. Effort becomes more focused, more intentional, and often more effective. You may also notice that your goals begin to evolve. What once seemed important may lose its urgency, while other things, clarity, balance, meaningful progress, become more central. This shift is not about lowering ambition, but about aligning it more closely with what actually matters to you. At the same time, there's a greater sense of presence in your daily life. Because you're less caught in constant mental conflict, you're able to experience moments more fully. Conversations feel more genuine. Work feels more focused. Even simple routines carry a different kind of awareness. And within that awareness, there's a kind of quiet aspects of this entire process is that it continues to build on itself. The more you understand your subconscious patterns, the easier it becomes to work with them. The more you align your thoughts and expectations, the more natural that alignment feels. It's a process that becomes smoother over time, not more complicated. And yet, even as things become clearer, there's always more depth to explore. New situations will challenge you in different ways. Old patterns may try to resurface in unfamiliar forms. But now, you have a framework, not rigid rules, but a way of understanding how your inner world interacts with your outer experience. That framework allows you to navigate change without losing your sense of direction. It gives you the ability to adjust without feeling overwhelmed, to grow without feeling forced, and to move forward without constantly questioning yourself. In the end, What you gain is not just the ability to influence specific outcomes, but a deeper sense of alignment with your own life. You begin to see that the most important work is not something you do once, but something you live continuously, through your awareness, your attention, and the patterns you choose to reinforce. And from that place, the idea of growth stops feeling like something you chase, and starts feeling like something that naturally unfolds as you continue to understand and work with the quiet power that has been within you all along. There's a point where all of this stops feeling like something you are practicing and starts feeling like something you simply understand. Not in an intellectual way, but in a way that shows up in how you think, how you respond, and how you carry yourself through everyday life. The ideas are no longer separate from you. They've blended into your natural way of seeing things. You begin to notice that you are no longer searching as much. Earlier, there may have been a constant need to fix, improve, or figure things out. Now, there's more clarity, and with that clarity comes a kind of quiet stability. You still grow, you still aim for better outcomes, but it doesn't come from a place of lack. It comes from a place of direction. The subconscious mind, which once felt mysterious or difficult to access, now feels more like a partner than a hidden force. You understand that it responds to what you consistently reinforce, and that awareness alone changes how you engage with your thoughts. You are no longer careless with what you repeat internally, because you've seen the long-term effects of those patterns. This doesn't mean you become rigid or overly controlled. In fact, it's often the opposite. There's more ease in your thinking, not less. You are not trying to monitor every thought or eliminate every negative feeling. Instead, you trust the overall direction of your mind because you've shaped its foundation. And that foundation becomes something you can rely on, especially during difficult moments. When challenges arise, and they always do, you don't immediately fall back into old patterns of doubt or fear. Those patterns may still appear, but they don't take over in the same way. There's a steadiness underneath them, something that keeps you grounded. You start to see that confidence is not something you force or perform. It's something that develops naturally when your internal patterns are aligned. It shows up in how you make decisions, how you handle uncertainty, and how you move forward even when you don't have complete clarity. There's also a shift in how you measure progress. Instead of looking only at external results, you begin to value internal consistency. Are your thoughts aligned with your direction? Are your reactions becoming more balanced? Are you maintaining clarity even when things don't go as planned? These become more meaningful indicators of growth. At the same time, you become more aware of how easily old patterns can return if you stop paying attention. Not in a way that creates fear, but in a way that reinforces the importance of staying engaged with your own thinking. The process is ongoing, but it no longer feels difficult. It feels natural, like maintaining something that matters to you. There's also a deeper sense of independence that develops. You rely less on external validation to confirm your progress or your worth. This doesn't mean you disconnect from others or ignore feedback, but it means your sense of direction is no longer entirely shaped by outside opinions. This independence creates a kind of quiet confidence that others can often sense. Not because you are trying to project anything, but because you are no longer internally conflicted in the same way. Your actions, thoughts, and intentions are more aligned, and that alignment shows. You may also find that your constant stress and inner conflict feels very different from a goal reached with clarity and steadiness. And in many cases, that internal quality ends up influencing the outcome itself. When your mind is clear and focused, your decisions tend to improve. When your expectations are balanced and constructive, your actions become more effective. It's not a guarantee of perfect results, but it significantly changes the way you approach the process. As everything comes together, there's a sense that the boundary between your inner world and outer life is no longer as rigid as it once seemed. You see more clearly how your thoughts influence your perception influences your actions, and your actions influence your results. This awareness doesn't make you feel like you have to control everything. Instead, it gives you a sense of participation. You are involved in shaping your experience, even if you are not controlling every detail. And perhaps the most meaningful part of all of this is that it brings a sense of coherence to your life. Things feel more connected, more intentional, and less random. You understand why certain patterns lead to certain outcomes, and you know how to adjust when needed. From here, there's no final destination to reach. There's no moment where everything is complete. What there is, instead, is a continuous process of awareness, adjustment, and alignment. A way of living where you remain connected to your own thinking, aware of your patterns, and intentional about the direction you are moving in. And in that way of living, the power of your subconscious mind is no longer something you are trying to unlock. It's something you are already using, quietly, consistently, and in a way that supports the life you are continuing to build. There's a subtle shift that happens when you stop looking at growth as something you need to chase and begin to see it as something that unfolds through how you live each day. By now, the idea of working with your subconscious is no longer abstract. It has become something practical, something woven into your awareness. And yet, there is still one more layer that quietly deepens everything you've understood so far: the way meaning itself is shaped from within. Two people can live through similar circumstances and walk away with completely different interpretations. One may see limitation, while the other sees direction. One may feel stuck, while the other feels guided towards something better. The difference is not always in the situation, but in the internal framework through which that situation is processed. Your subconscious mind plays a major role in creating that framework. It influences not just what you notice, but what things mean to you. And meaning, more than events themselves, often determines your emotional response and your next step forward. When your internal patterns are rooted in fear or doubt, even neutral experiences can feel negative. A delay feels like failure. A challenge feels like a dead end. A mistake feels like proof that you are not capable. These interpretations are often automatic, shaped by patterns you may not even realize you are following. But as your subconscious becomes more aligned with steadiness and possibility, those same situations begin to feel different. A delay becomes time to adjust. A challenge becomes something to navigate. A mistake becomes information rather than judgment. The external event hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. This shift in meaning is powerful because it affects momentum. When you interpret experiences in a way that supports movement, you are more likely to keep going. When you interpret them in a way that reinforces limitation, you are more likely to stop or pull back. Over time, this creates two very different paths, even if they begin in the same place. There's also a deeper sense of personal clarity that develops as you continue to refine your internal patterns. You begin to understand what actually matters to you, separate from what you've been conditioned to value. This clarity reduces internal conflict, because you are no longer trying to move in directions that don't truly align with you. And when there is less conflict, there is more energy available for focus, for creativity, and for meaningful action. Another important aspect of this stage is how you begin to handle uncertainty in a more grounded way. Instead of needing constant reassurance or immediate answers, you become more comfortable moving forward without complete clarity. This doesn't come from ignoring risk, but from trusting your ability to adapt. That trust is built from experience. You've seen yourself adjust before. You've seen patterns change. You've seen that your internal state can influence your outcomes. And that experience results. You're choosing directions that feel consistent with your understanding, even if they require patience. This patience is not passive. It's active in a steady way. It allows things to develop without unnecessary interference. It creates space for better timing, clearer thinking, and more thoughtful action. There's also a growing sense of balance between effort and ease. You're still putting in effort where it's needed, but you're no longer forcing things that don't align. You recognize when to act and when to step back. This balance prevents burnout and keeps your progress sustainable. Relationships continue to reflect these changes as well. When you bring clarity, steadiness, and self-awareness into your interactions, it often encourages the same in others. And even when it doesn't, you're less affected by it. You don't absorb every reaction or take everything personally in the same way. This creates a more stable social environment, not because everything is perfect, but because your internal state is less dependent on external fluctuations. As all of this comes together, you begin to experience a different kind of confidence, one that isn't tied to specific outcomes or constant success. It's based on your ability to think clearly, to adjust when needed, and to stay aligned with your direction over time. And that confidence changes how you approach the future. It becomes less about trying to predict every detail and more about trusting the process you've developed. You understand now that your subconscious mind is not something separate from you. It is part of how you experience everything: your thoughts, your emotions, your interpretations, your actions. And working with it is not a one-time effort, but an ongoing relationship. From this point forward, the focus is no longer on learning new techniques or searching for better methods. It's on continuing to live with awareness, to notice your patterns, and to gently guide them when needed. Because in the end, the most meaningful change doesn't come from what you do occasionally. It comes from what you consistently return to, the thoughts you reinforce, the meanings you create, and the quiet understanding that you are always shaping your experience from within, whether you realize it or not. What ultimately settles in, after everything you've explored, is a quiet understanding that nothing about this process is separate from your everyday life. It's not something you switch on during certain moments and forget the rest of the time. It's present in how you wake up, how you think through small decisions, how you respond to unexpected situations, and even in the silent conversations you have with yourself throughout the day. By now, the idea of changing your life by working with your subconscious no longer feels like a technique. It feels more like a perspective, a way of seeing how everything connects. Your thoughts are no longer random or insignificant. Your reactions are no longer automatic in the same way. There is awareness where there used to be habit, and with that awareness comes a kind of quiet discipline. Not rigid or forced, but natural. You begin to notice when your thinking drifts into patterns that don't serve you, and instead of getting pulled in completely, you adjust. Sometimes quickly, sometimes gradually, but with a sense that you are not powerless in the process. There's also a deeper level of honesty that develops. You become more aware of what you truly believe, not just what you say you believe. And that awareness allows you to work with your mind more effectively, because you're no longer trying to cover over deeper patterns with surface-level thoughts. This honesty can be uncomfortable at times. It may show you areas where old fears still exist, where doubt still lingers, or where past experiences have left a lasting impression. But instead of seeing this as a problem, you begin to see it as information, something you can work with, something that can still be reshaped. That shift in perspective removes a lot of unnecessary pressure. You're no longer trying to become perfect. You're simply becoming more aware and more aligned over time. Another important realization is that your environment plays a role in reinforcing your subconscious patterns. The people you interact with, the information you consume, the conversations you engage in, all of these contribute to what your mind absorbs and repeats. As your awareness grows, you naturally become more selective, not in a restrictive or isolating way, but in a way that reflects your understanding of how influence works. You begin to choose environments that support clarity rather than confusion, that encourage growth rather than reinforce limitation. This doesn't mean avoiding all negativity or between inner work and external action. Earlier, it might have felt like you needed to focus heavily on one or the other, but now, you see that both are connected. Your internal alignment supports your actions, and your actions reinforce your internal patterns. You don't wait to feel perfect before taking steps forward, but you also don't ignore your internal state. You allow both to develop together, creating a more stable and sustainable kind of progress. As this balance becomes more natural, you may notice that life feels less fragmented. You're not one way in your thoughts and another in your actions. There's more consistency, more coherence. And that coherence creates a sense of ease that wasn't there before. Even your goals begin to feel different. They are still important, still meaningful, but they are no longer the only source of fulfillment. The process itself, the way you think, the way you grow, the way you engage with life, becomes just as valuable. And that changes the emotional weight of everything. You're less anxious about outcomes, less attached to immediate results, and more focused on maintaining alignment over time. There's also a quiet acceptance that not everything will go exactly as planned. But instead of seeing that as a setback, you understand it as part of the process. Your ability to adjust, to reinterpret, and to continue forward becomes more important than controlling every detail. This acceptance doesn't weaken your ambition. It strengthens your resilience. As you continue living with this awareness, something becomes clear. The real power of your subconscious mind is not just in helping you achieve specific things, but in shaping the quality of your entire experience. It influences how you see, how you feel, how you respond, and ultimately, how you live. And perhaps the most meaningful part of all of this is that it's ongoing. There is no final point where everything is complete. There is always another layer of awareness, another pattern to refine, another opportunity to align more closely with the life you want to live. But instead of feeling endless or overwhelming, this feels natural. It feels like growth in its simplest form, something that happens as long as you remain aware, attentive, and willing to guide your own thinking. And in that quiet, steady process, you come to realize that the power you were looking for was never something distant or hidden. It was always present, shaping your life in subtle ways. Now, it's simply something you understand, and something you know how to use. There's a certain calm that settles in when you stop searching for a final answer and begin to trust the way things are unfolding through your own awareness. By this point, it's no longer about trying to master your mind in some perfect, controlled way. It's about staying connected to it, understanding its patterns, and guiding it with a steady hand rather than force. What becomes more apparent now is how much of life is shaped not by dramatic decisions, but by the quiet, repeated directions you give yourself every day. The tone of your inner dialogue, the expectations you carry into ordinary moments, the meaning you assign to small events, all of these continue to build your experience, piece by piece. And because these patterns are subtle, they often go unnoticed unless you deliberately pay attention. But once you do, you begin to see just how much influence they have. A single recurring thought, repeated over days and weeks, can shape your mood, your behavior, and even your sense of what's possible. This awareness doesn't make you overly cautious or tense. Instead, it makes you more intentional. You don't need to control everything, but you do recognize that what you consistently allow into your mind tends to stay there. And what stays there tends to grow. There's also a deeper appreciation for simplicity. Earlier, it might have felt like you needed complex methods or constant effort to create change. But now, it becomes clear that simple, consistent alignment is often more powerful than anything complicated. A clear thought, repeated calmly. A steady expectation, held without pressure. A small shift in how you respond to situations. These are the things that create lasting change. At the same time, you begin to trust your own rhythm. You no longer feel the need to rush progress or compare your path to others. You understand that internal change happens at its own pace, and trying to force it often creates resistance rather than movement. This trust allows you to move forward with less tension. You still take action, still make decisions, but without the constant pressure to get everything right immediately. There's room to adjust, to learn, and to refine your approach as you go. But now, there's a greater acceptance that not everything can be controlled in that way. Instead of trying to control every external detail, you focus more on maintaining internal clarity. And from that clarity, your actions become more effective. You respond to what's in front of you, rather than reacting to imagined outcomes. This makes your decision-making more grounded. You are less influenced by fear or urgency, and more guided by a steady sense of direction. Even when the path isn't fully clear, you are able to take the next step without hesitation. There's also a growing sense of ease in how you relate to yourself. The constant internal criticism that often drives people begins to soften, not because you stop wanting to improve, but because you no longer see yourself as something that needs to be fixed. You begin to approach yourself with the same kind of understanding you would offer someone else, recognizing that change takes time, that setbacks are part of the process, and that growth is not always linear. This shift creates a more supportive internal environment. And in that environment, progress becomes more sustainable. You are not constantly pushing against yourself. You are working with yourself. As this continues, your external life reflects that internal balance more and more. Your actions are clearer, your communication is more direct, and your responses are more measured. You are less reactive, less scattered, and more focused on what actually matters. People may notice this change, even if they can't explain it. There's a steadiness in how you carry yourself, a sense that you are not easily pulled off course, and that steadiness often influences how others interact with you as well. But perhaps the most important change is internal. You feel more aligned with your own thinking. There's less conflict, less second guessing, and more clarity in how you move through your day. And within that clarity, there's a quiet confidence, not loud or performative, but stable. It doesn't depend on constant success or external approval. It comes from understanding how your mind works and knowing that you can guide it when needed. At this stage, growth no longer feels like something you are striving toward. It feels like something that naturally continues as long as you remain aware and intentional. There's no need to force it, no need to chase it. And yet, even here, the process doesn't end, because every new level of awareness brings new layers to explore, new patterns to refine, and new opportunities to align more deeply with the direction you've chosen. What once felt like an effort has now become a way of living. And from this point forward, everything you experience becomes part of that ongoing process, something you can observe, learn from, and shape in your own quiet, consistent way. There's a quiet realization that begins to settle in now, one that changes how you see everything that came before. It's the understanding that nothing you've learned is separate from who you are becoming. It's not a set of ideas you apply occasionally, but something that has slowly reshaped the way you think, respond, and move through life. At this stage, you are no longer trying to use your subconscious mind in a deliberate, mechanical way. Instead, you are living in alignment with it. The effort that once felt necessary has softened into awareness. You are not constantly correcting yourself, but you are noticing. And that noticing is enough to keep you on course. What becomes clearer is that your inner world is always active, always influencing your experience, whether you pay attention to it or not. The difference now is that you are paying attention. You are aware of the tone of your thoughts, the direction of your expectations, and the subtle patterns that shape your reactions. This awareness doesn't interrupt your life, it enhances it. It allows you to move through situations with a sense of presence that wasn't there before. You are not lost in every thought or carried away by every emotion. There's a steadiness underneath it all, something that keeps you grounded even when things are uncertain. You may also notice that your need for constant control has eased. Earlier, there may have been a tendency to overthink, to analyze every possibility, to try to predict outcomes before taking action. Now, there's more trust in the process. You still think things through, but you don't get stuck in that loop of endless consideration. This trust is not blind. It's built from experience. You've seen how your internal patterns shape your external results. You've seen how there's also a deeper sense of acceptance that develops, not resignation, but a willingness to work with reality as it is, rather than constantly wishing it were different. This acceptance actually creates more room for change, because you're no longer resisting what's already happening. When you stop resisting, your mind becomes clearer. And when your mind is clear, your actions become more precise. You respond to what's in front of you instead of reacting to what you fear might happen. That shift alone can change the outcome of many situations. Another important change is how you relate to time. You're less focused on immediate results and more aware of long-term direction. You understand that the patterns you reinforce today will shape your experience tomorrow, even if the effects are not immediately visible. This perspective reduces impatience. You're no longer looking for instant proof that something is working. Instead, you trust the process enough to continue without constant validation. And that trust allows your efforts to compound over time. There's also a quiet confidence in your ability to adapt. Life continues to present new challenges, new environments, new uncertainties. But instead of feeling unprepared, you feel capable of adjusting. Not because you have all the answers, but because you trust your ability to find them. This adaptability becomes one of your greatest strengths. It allows you to move forward even when conditions are not ideal, to learn as you go, and to refine your approach without losing your sense of direction. As you continue living with this awareness, your priorities may shift in subtle ways. You begin to value clarity over intensity, consistency over short bursts of effort, and alignment over external approval. These shifts influence your decisions, often without you needing to consciously think about them. And in that, there's a kind of ease that wasn't there before. You're no longer pulled in as many conflicting directions. You know what you're reinforcing internally, and you understand how that shapes your experience externally. Perhaps the most meaningful part of this stage is that it feels sustainable. It's not dependent on motivation, which comes and goes. It's based on understanding, which stays with you. That makes it something you can carry forward, not just for a short period, but over the long term. And as you continue, you begin to see that this is not about reaching a final version of yourself. It's about maintaining a relationship with your own mind, one that is aware, responsive, and steadily aligned with the direction you want to move in. From here, life doesn't become perfectly controlled or completely predictable, but it does become more coherent. Your inner and outer worlds begin to reflect each other more clearly. And in that reflection, you find something that feels both simple and profound, the understanding that the way you think, consistently and quietly, is shaping far more than you once realized. And once you truly see that, it's something you don't forget. In the end, what stays with you is not a collection of techniques or specific phrases, but a way of seeing yourself and your life that feels steady and grounded. It's the realization that the most important changes don't happen in moments of intensity, but in the quiet, repeated patterns you return to every day. You begin to understand that your subconscious mind was never something distant or inaccessible. It has always been there, quietly receiving, storing, and expressing whatever you consistently impressed upon it. The difference now is that you are no longer unaware of that process. You've stepped into a more conscious relationship with it. This awareness changes how you move through even the simplest parts of your day. The way you interpret a delay, the way you respond to a mistake, the way you think about your future, none of these feel random anymore. They feel connected. And because they feel connected, they become something you can gently shape. There's no need to force positivity or deny reality. In fact, that kind of force often creates more resistance than progress. What matters is a quiet alignment, choosing thoughts that are constructive, expectations that are balanced, and responses that support the direction you want to move in. Over time, this alignment becomes your default. You don't have to remind yourself constantly. It shows up naturally in how you think and act. And because it's natural, it's sustainable. You also come to see that growth is not about eliminating every negative thought or emotion. It's about changing your relationship with them. You notice them earlier, you engage with them differently, and you don't allow them to define your direction in the same way. This creates a you that remains intact. That steadiness becomes your foundation. It influences your decisions, your actions, and your interactions with others. It allows you to move forward without constantly questioning yourself, and to adjust when needed without losing confidence. There's also a deeper sense of responsibility that comes with this understanding, but it doesn't feel heavy. It feels clarifying. You recognize that what you repeatedly think and feel matters, and that awareness naturally leads you to be more intentional. Not perfect, not rigid, just more aware. And that awareness continues to guide you, even when you're not actively thinking about it. It becomes part of how you operate, part of how you interpret the world, and part of how you respond to it. As you move forward, you may still set goals, still pursue growth, still aim for better outcomes. But the way you approach those things is different. There's less urgency, less pressure, and more clarity. You're not chasing change, you're allowing it to unfold through consistent alignment. You also begin to trust that small shifts matter, that a single thought, repeated over time, can influence your direction, that a small change in perspective can alter how you experience an entire situation. These are not dramatic realizations, but they are powerful in their own way. And perhaps the most important thing you carry with you is the understanding that this is an ongoing process. There is no final point where everything is complete. There is always another level of awareness, another opportunity to refine your thinking, another moment where you can choose how you respond. But instead of feeling endless, this feels natural. It feels like part of living, something that continues as long as you remain present and attentive. In that sense, the real outcome is not just a better set of results, but a different experience of life itself. One where you are not simply reacting to what happens, but participating in how it unfolds. And as you continue in that direction, the role of your subconscious mind becomes clear. It is not something to control or struggle with, but something to understand and work with, quietly, consistently, and with a sense of trust that what you reinforce within yourself will, over time, shape the life you experience. That understanding stays with you, not as a rule, not as a technique, but as a steady awareness in the background of everything you do. And from that place, you move forward, not perfectly, not without challenges, but with a clarity that makes the path ahead feel a little more intentional, and a lot more your own.